This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Deborah Lynn, Northern Lower Michigan, March 2007. Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. Part 5th, 6. The unnoticed lives that the pair had hitherto led began, from the day of the suspended wedding onwards, to be observed and discussed by other persons than Arabella. The society of Spring Street and the neighborhood generally did not understand, and probably could not have been made to understand, Sue and Jude's private minds, emotions, positions, and fears. The curious facts of a child coming to them unexpectedly, who called Jude father and Sue mother, and a hitch in a marriage ceremony intended for quietness, to be performed at a registrar's office, together with rumors of the undefended cases in the law courts, bore only one translation to plain minds. Little Time, for though he was formally turned into Jude, the apt nickname stuck to him, would come home from school in the evening and repeat inquiries and remarks that had been made to him by the other boys, and cause Sue and Jude, when he heard them, a great deal of pain and sadness. The result was that shortly after the attempt at the registrar's the pair went off, to London it was believed, for several days, hiring somebody to look to the boy. When they came back they let it be understood, indirectly, and with total indifference and weariness of mien, that they were legally married at last. Sue, who had previously been called Mrs. Bridehead, now openly adopted the name of Mrs. Fawley. Her dull, cowed, and listless manner for days seemed to substantiate all this. But the mistake, as it was called, of their going away so secretly to do the business, kept up much of the mystery of their lives, and they found that they made not such advances with their neighbors as they had expected to do thereby. A living mystery was not much less interesting than a dead scandal. The baker's lad and the grocer's boy, who at first had used to lift their hats gallantly to Sue when they came to execute their errands, in these days no longer took the trouble to render her that homage, and the neighboring artisans' wives looked straight along the pavement when they encountered her. Nobody molested them, it is true, but an oppressive atmosphere began to encircle their souls, particularly after their excursion to the show, as if that visit had brought some evil influence to bear on them. And their temperaments were precisely of a kind to suffer from this atmosphere, and to be indisposed to lighten it by vigorous and open statements. Their apparent attempt at reparation had come too late to be effective. The headstone and epitaph orders fell off, and 2 or 3 months later, when autumn came, Jude perceived that he would have to return to journey work again, a course all the more unfortunate just now, in that he had not as yet cleared off the debt he had unavoidably incurred in the payment of the law costs of the previous year. One evening he sat down to share the common meal with Sue and the child as usual. "I am thinking," he said to her, "that I'll hold on here no longer. The life suits us certainly, but if we could get away to a place where we are unknown, we should be lighter hearted and have a better chance. And so I am afraid we must break it up here, however awkward for you, poor dear." Sue was always much affected at a picture of herself as an object of pity, and she saddened. "Well, I am not sorry," said she presently. "I am much depressed by the way they look at me here, and you have been keeping on this house and furniture entirely for me and the boy. You don't want it yourself, and the expense is unnecessary. But whatever we do, wherever we go, you won't take him away from me, Jude dear. I could not let him go now. The cloud upon his young mind makes him so pathetic to me. I do hope to lift it some day. And he loves me so. You won't take him away from me." "Certainly I won't, dear little girl. We'll get nice lodgings, wherever we go. I shall be moving about, probably, getting a job here and a job there. I shall do something too, of course, till well, now I can't be useful in the lettering, it behooves me to turn my hand to something else. "Don't hurry about getting employment," he said regretfully. "I don't want you to do that. I wish you wouldn't, Sue. The boy and yourself are enough for you to attend to." There was a knock at the door, and Jude answered it. Sue could hear the conversation. "Is Mr. Fawley at home? Biles and Willis, the building contractors, sent me to know if you'll undertake the re-lettering of the 10 Commandments in a little church they've been restoring lately in the country near here." Jude reflected and said he could undertake it. "It is not a very artistic job," continued the messenger. "The clergyman is a very old-fashioned chap, and he has refused to let anything more be done to the church than cleaning and repairing." "Excellent old man," said Sue to herself, who was sentimentally opposed to the horrors of over-restoration. "The 10 Commandments are fixed to the east end," the messenger went on, "and they want doing up with the rest of the wall there, since he won't have them carted off as old materials belonging to the contractor in the usual way of the trade." A bargain as to terms was struck, and Jude came indoors. "There, you see," he said cheerfully, "one more job yet, at any rate, and you can help in it, at least you can try. We shall have all the church to ourselves, as the rest of the work is finished." Next day Jude went out to the church, which was only 2 miles off. He found that what the contractor's clerk had said was true. The tables of the Jewish law towered sternly over the utensils of Christian grace as the chief ornament of the chancel end in the fine dry style of the last century. And as their framework was constructed of ornamental plaster, they could not be taken down for repair. A portion, crumbled by damp, required renewal, and when this had been done and the whole cleansed, he began to renew the lettering. On the second morning Sue came to see what assistance she could render, and also because they liked to be together. The silence and emptiness of the building gave her confidence, and standing on a safe low platform erected by Jude, which she was nevertheless timid at mounting, she began painting in the letters of the first table, while he set about mending a portion of the second. She was quite pleased at her powers. She had acquired them in the days she painted illumined texts for the church fitting shop at Christminster. Nobody seemed likely to disturb them, and the pleasant twitter of birds and rustle of October leafage came in through an open window and mingled with their talk. They were not, however, to be left thus snug and peaceful for long. About 12:30 there came footsteps on the gravel without. The old vicar and his churchwarden entered, and coming up to see what was being done, seemed surprised to discover that a young woman was assisting. They passed on into an aisle, at which time the door again opened, and another figure entered, a small one, that of little Time, who was crying. Sue had told him where he might find her between school hours if he wished. She came down from her perch and said, "What's the matter, my dear?" "I couldn't stay to eat my dinner in school because they said—" He described how some boys had taunted him about his nominal mother, and Sue, grieved, expressed her indignation to Jude aloft. The child went into the churchyard, and Sue returned to her work. Meanwhile the door had opened again, and there shuffled in, with a business-like air, the white-aproned woman who cleaned the church. Sue recognized her as one who had friends in Spring Street, whom she visited. The church cleaner looked at Sue, gaped, and lifted her hands. She had evidently recognized Jude's companion as the latter had recognized her. Next came 2 ladies, and after talking to the charwoman they also moved forward, and as Sue stood reaching upward, watched her hand tracing the letters, and critically regarded her person in relief against the white wall, till she grew so nervous that she trembled visibly. They went back to where the others were standing, talking in undertones, and one said, Sue could not hear which, "She's his wife, I suppose." "Some say yes, some say no," was the reply from the charwoman. "Not? Then she ought to be, or somebody's, that's very clear. They've only been married a very few weeks, whether or no. A strange pair to be painting the 2 tables. I wonder Biles and Willis could think of such a thing as hiring those." The churchwarden supposed that Biles and Willis knew of nothing wrong, and then the other, who had been talking to the old woman, explained what she meant by calling them strange people. The probable drift of the subdued conversation which followed was made plain by the churchwarden breaking into an anecdote in a voice that everybody in the church could hear, though obviously suggested by the present situation. "Well, now, it is a curious thing, but my grandfather told me a strange tale of a most immoral case that happened at the painting of the commandments in a church out by Gaymead, which is quite within a walk of this one. In them days commandments were mostly done in gilt letters on a black ground, and that's how they were out where I say, before the ould church was rebuilded. It must have been somewhere about 100 years ago that them commandments wanted doing up, just as ours do here, and they had to get men from Aldbrickham to do 'em. Now they wished to get the job finished by a particular Sunday, so the men had to work late Saturday night against their will, for overtime was not paid then, as 'tis now. There was no true religion in the country at that date, neither among parsons, clerks, nor people, and to keep the men up to their work the vicar had to let 'em have plenty of drink during the afternoon. As evening drawed on they sent for some more themselves, rum by all account. It got later and later, and they got more and more fuddled, till at last they went a putting their rum bottle and rummers upon the communion table, and drawed up a trestle or two, and sate round comfortable, and poured out again right hearty bumpers. No sooner had they tossed off their glasses than, so the story goes, they fell down senseless, one and all. How long they bode so, they didn't know, but when they came to themselves there was a terrible thunderstorm a-raging, and they seemed to see in the gloom a dark figure with very thin legs and a curious foot, a-standing on the ladder, and finishing their work. And when it got daylight they could see that the work was really finished, and couldn't at all mind finishing it themselves. They went home, and the next thing they heard was that a great scandal had been caused in the church that Sunday morning, for when the people came and service began, all saw that the 10 Commandments was painted with the knots left out. Decent people wouldn't attend service there for a long time, and the bishop had to be sent for to reconsecrate the church. That's the tradition as I used to hear it as a child. You must take it for what it is worth, but this case today has reminded me o't, as I say." The visitors gave one more glance, as if to see whether Jude and Sue had left the knots out likewise, and then severally left the church, even the old woman at last. Sue and Jude, who had not stopped working, sent back the child to school, and remained without speaking till, looking at her narrowly, he found she had been crying silently. "Never mind, comrade," he said, "I know what it is. I can't bear that they and everybody should think people wicked because they may have chosen to live their own way. It is really these opinions that make the best intentioned people reckless and actually become immoral. Never be cast down. It was only a funny story." "Ah, but we suggested it. I am afraid I have done you mischief, Jude, instead of helping you by coming." To have suggested such a story was certainly not very exhilarating in a serious view of their position. However, in a few minutes Sue seemed to see that their position this morning had a ludicrous side, and wiping her eyes she laughed. "It is droll, after all," she said, "that we two, of all people, with our queer history, should happen to be here painting the 10 Commandments. You a reprobate, and I in my condition. Oh dear!" And with her hand over her eyes she laughed again, silently and intermittently, till she was quite weak. "That's better," said Jude gaily. "Now we are right again, aren't we, little girl?" "Oh, but it is serious, all the same," she sighed as she took up the brush and righted herself. "But do you see, they don't think we are married. They won't believe it. It is extraordinary." "I don't care whether they think so or not," said Jude. "I shan't take any more trouble to make them." They sat down to lunch, which they had brought with them not to hinder time, and having eaten it were about to set to work anew, when a man entered the church, and Jude recognized in him the contractor Willis. He beckoned to Jude and spoke to him apart. "Here, I've just had a complaint about this," he said, with rather breathless awkwardness. "I don't wish to go into the matter, as of course I didn't know what was going on, but I am afraid I must ask you and her to leave off and let somebody else finish this. It is best, to avoid all unpleasantness. I'll pay you for the week all the same." Jude was too independent to make any fuss, and the contractor paid him and left. Jude picked up his tools, and Sue cleansed her brush. Then their eyes met. "How could we be so simple as to suppose we might do this?" said she, dropping to her tragic note. "Of course we ought not. I ought not to have come." "I had no idea that anybody was going to intrude into such a lonely place and see us," Jude returned. "Well, it can't be helped, dear, and of course I wouldn't wish to injure Willis's trade connection by staying." They sat down passively for a few minutes, proceeded out of the church, and overtaking the boy, pursued their thoughtful way to Aldbrickham. Fawley had still a pretty zeal in the cause of education, and, as was natural with his experiences, he was active in furthering equality of opportunity by any humble means open to him. He had joined an Artisans' Mutual Improvement Society established in the town about the time of his arrival there, its members being young men of all creeds and denominations, including churchmen, Congregationalists, Baptists, Unitarians, Positivists, and others. Agnostics had scarcely been heard of at this time. Their one common wish to enlarge their minds forming a sufficiently close bond of union. The subscription was small and the room homely, and Jude's activity, uncustomary acquirements, and above all, singular intuition on what to read and how to set about it, begotten of his years of struggle against malignant stars, had led to his being placed on the committee. A few evenings after his dismissal from the church repairs, and before he had obtained any more work to do, he went to attend a meeting of the aforesaid committee. It was late when he arrived. All the others had come, and as he entered they looked dubiously at him, and hardly uttered a word of greeting. He guessed that something bearing on himself had been either discussed or mooted. Some ordinary business was transacted, and it was disclosed that the number of subscriptions had shown a sudden falling off for that quarter. One member, a really well-meaning and upright man, began speaking in enigmas about certain possible causes, that it behoved them to look well into their constitution, for if the committee were not respected, and had not at least in their differences a common standard of conduct, they would bring the institution to the ground. Nothing further was said in Jude's presence, but he knew what this meant, and turning to the table, wrote a note resigning his office there and then. Thus the supersensitive couple were more and more impelled to go away, and then bills were sent in, and the question arose, what could Jude do with his great aunt's heavy old furniture if he left the town to travel he knew not whither? This and the necessity of ready money compelled him to decide on an auction, much as he would have preferred to keep the venerable goods. The day of the sale came on, and Sue for the last time cooked her own, the child's, and Jude's breakfast in the little house he had furnished. It chanced to be a wet day. Moreover, Sue was unwell, and not wishing to desert her poor Jude in such gloomy circumstances, for he was compelled to stay a while, she acted on the suggestion of the auctioneer's man, and ensconced herself in an upper room, which could be emptied of its effects, and so kept close to the bidders. Here Jude discovered her, and with the child and their few trunks, baskets, and bundles, and 2 chairs and a table that were not in the sale, the two sat in meditative talk. Footsteps began stamping up and down the bare stairs, the comers inspecting the goods, some of which were of so quaint and ancient a make as to acquire an adventitious value as art. Their door was tried once or twice, and to guard themselves against intrusion, Jude wrote "Private" on a scrap of paper and stuck it upon the panel. They soon found that instead of the furniture, their own personal histories and past conduct began to be discussed to an unexpected and intolerable extent by the intending bidders. It was not till now that they really discovered what a fool's paradise of supposed unrecognition they had been living in of late. Sue silently took her companion's hand, and with eyes on each other they heard these passing remarks, the quaint and mysterious personality of Father Time being a subject which formed a large ingredient in the hints and innuendos. At length the auction began in the room below, whence they could hear each familiar article knocked down, the highly prized ones cheaply, the unconsidered at an unexpected price. "People don't understand us," he sighed heavily. "I am glad we have decided to go. The question is, where to? It ought to be London. There one can live as one chooses." "No, not London, dear. I know it well. We should be unhappy there." "Why? Can't you think?" "Because Arabella is there? That's the chief reason." "But in the country I shall always be uneasy lest there should be some more of our late experience, and I don't care to lessen it by explaining, for one thing, all about the boy's history. To cut him off from his past I have determined to keep silence. I am sickened of ecclesiastical work now, and I shouldn't like to accept it if offered me." "You ought to have learnt classic. Gothic is barbaric art after all. Pugin was wrong and Wren was right. Remember the interior of Christminster Cathedral, almost the first place in which we looked in each other's faces? Under the picturesqueness of those Norman details, one can see the grotesque childishness of uncouth people trying to imitate the vanished Roman forms, remembered by dim tradition only. Yes, you have half converted me to that view by what you have said before, but one can work and despise what one does. I must do something, if not church Gothic." "I wish we could both follow an occupation in which personal circumstances don't count," she said, smiling up wistfully. "I am as disqualified for teaching as you are for ecclesiastical art. You must fall back upon railway stations, bridges, theatres, music halls, hotels, everything that has no connection with conduct. I am not skilled in those. I ought to take to bread baking. I grew up in the baking business with Aunt, you know, but even a baker must be conventional to get customers." "Unless he keeps a cake and gingerbread stall at markets and fairs, where people are gloriously indifferent to everything except the quality of the goods." Their thoughts were diverted by the voice of the auctioneer. "Now this antique oak settle, a unique example of old English furniture, worthy the attention of all collectors." "That was my great-grandfather's," said Jude. "I wish we could have kept the poor old thing." One by one the articles went, and the afternoon passed away. Jude and the other two were getting tired and hungry, but after the conversation they had heard they were shy of going out while the purchasers were in their line of retreat. However, the later lots drew on, and it became necessary to emerge into the rain soon, to take on Sue's things to their temporary lodging. "Now the next lot. 2 pairs of pigeons, all alive and plump, a nice pie for somebody for next Sunday's dinner." The impending sale of these birds had been the most trying suspense of the whole afternoon. They were Sue's pets, and when it was found that they could not possibly be kept, more sadness was caused than by parting from all the furniture. She tried to think away her tears as she heard the trifling sum that her dears were deemed to be worth advanced by small stages to the price at which they were finally knocked down. The purchaser was a neighbouring poulterer, and they were unquestionably doomed to die before the next market day. Noting her dissembled distress, Jude kissed her, and said it was time to go and see if the lodgings were ready. He would go on with the boy and fetch her soon. When she was left alone she waited patiently, but Jude did not come back. At last she started, the coast being clear, and on passing the poulterer's shop, not far off, she saw her pigeons in a hamper by the door. An emotion at sight of them, assisted by the growing dusk of evening, caused her to act on impulse, and first looking around her quickly, she pulled out the peg which fastened down the cover and went on. The cover was lifted from within, and the pigeons flew away with a clatter that brought the chagrined poulterer cursing and swearing to the door. Sue reached the lodging trembling, and found Jude and the boy making it comfortable for her. "Do the buyers pay before they bring away the things?" she asked breathlessly. "Yes, I think. Why?" "Because then I've done such a wicked thing," and she explained in bitter contrition. "I shall have to pay the poulterer for them, if he doesn't catch them," said Jude. "But never mind. Don't fret about it, dear." "It was so foolish of me. Oh, why should nature's law be mutual butchery?" "Is it so, mother?" asked the boy intently. "Yes," said Sue vehemently. "Well, they must take their chance now, poor things," said Jude. "As soon as the sale account is wound up and our bills paid, we go." "Where do we go to?" asked Time, in suspense. "We must sail under sealed orders, that nobody may trace us. We mustn't go to Alfredston, or to Melchester, or to Shaston, or to Christminster. Apart from those, we may go anywhere." "Why mustn't we go there, father?" "Because of a cloud that has gathered over us. Though we have wronged no man, corrupted no man, defrauded no man. Though perhaps we have done that which was right in our own eyes." End of Part Fifth, 6.